Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show, 20 years that changed home building. Want to know why there's cookie cutter houses? Want to know why there's McMansions? Want to know why houses are ugly today? Come join me, 20 years that changed everything. In preparing a bunch of my talks recently, I came across some amazing statistics and some amazing information that caused me to realize that there's a 20-year period of time in America that changed the way we deal with housing today. It was 20 years that influences the cookie cutter houses that we have today, McMansions, production builders, right? And just the state and economy of building in America happened because of these 20 years. 2023, we just look back at last year, what those stats were. About 1 million single family houses were built. The top 200 builders accounted for almost 50% of those houses, right? So D.R. Horton built 80 or 90,000 houses, 10% built by one home builder, which is rare because that isn't the way things used to be. 100 years ago, a large production builder built 200 or 300 houses a year. Most of them were small custom builders that built locally, that weren't national players, that didn't have huge loans at the bank. In fact, there's a book called American Housing, which was a study of the home building industry. I think it was done in 41 or 42, trying to figure out how to build up the home building industry. And part of the problem is that home builders, they found, crafted houses instead of building them in the production mindset. That was the problem. We've changed in the last 100 years the way we think about houses, the way we buy houses, the way we live in houses, the percentage of ownership in houses, which is a good thing for people. So because the focus of how we build has changed, right? That the builder in the early 20s was a builder who crafted houses one at a time. The average builder at that time built 1 to 4 houses a year versus the massive production builders that are building thousands and thousands of houses. The whole approach to building has completely changed. Now, that 20-year period started in 1926 and it lasts till 1946. If you consider that this 20 years that changed everything, okay, starts in 1926. Now you're saying, well, what happened in 1926? 1926 was the peak year of the roaring 20s when home building was at its most. We built 1 million houses a year, okay, in 1926. Right at 1 million. That number was kind of an early peak and an early time of building houses. If you live in a house in an area where there's a lot of period revival houses, that was that 1926 period. It went down a little bit, and by 29 with the crash, right? And by 33, okay, we're building like 100,000 houses a year. Okay, so if you look at housing stock or houses built in the 30s and 40s, they're very different than the houses built in the 20s. The materials have changed. And this depression, okay, changed molding sizes. I mean, one of the things, me being a molding geek, if you look at moldings in 1920, they're 4.5 inches wide. They're big. If you look at moldings in 1930, they're 2.5, 3.5 inches wide. Everything started changing during this time period. We kind of muddle through the 1930s. We're starting to get better by 38, 39, and then the war happens, okay? War takes place. We go into the war in the early 40s, and we don't come out of that war till ends in 45. 16 million GIs come home in 1946. So we kind of, but by 46, okay, we've got a huge problem, okay? And that huge problem is 16 million GIs come home, and you realize that if 1 million houses a year is kind of the standard for how many houses need to be built in order for there to be enough supply and demand, okay? So if you figure we don't hit that number again until the 1950s, okay, you realize that there's this huge period of time where we haven't been building enough houses, and the houses that we've been building are small and cheaply built sometimes. And so what happens right here, okay? The industry, including the builders and including the architects, including the manufacturers, including everybody, is trying to figure out how to build houses. It's very similar to the housing crisis we just are coming through, right? Where affordability is a hard thing. We're looking for all these different solutions to try to figure out, is it a tiny house? Is it zoning? Is it, what is the way to solve this housing crisis that we have right now? We had the same thing going in 46. And what came out of that was two things. One, the builders basically began to follow a model developed by William Levitt. Now, William Levitt, if you've heard of Levittown and things like that, was a builder who was building period revival houses in the 20s. And then during this war period, he goes to Virginia and ends up building houses for a shipping yard. And he learns how to build cheap and fast for the government. Realizes that you could put things on slabs. Realizes that thinking about and breaking the rules for how you build a house really could change. He comes back in 47, 48 and starts building houses very small, okay? The average house size in 26, 12 to 1,400 square feet. William Levitt's building houses that are 800 square feet, 600 square feet, over and over again. And he basically broke the housing building system into 26 steps. And at his peak, okay, and he would not call himself a builder, he called himself a manufacturer. I mean, William Levitt knew how many nails went into every house that he built. He was completely vertically integrated, owned the forests, owned the lumber yards, owned the nail yards, right? It was a genius way of thinking about building in some ways. And so he basically broke it down into 26 steps. And so if you had a development in 1926, and this is a new thing, you might have a house goes here, you might have a house go here, you might have a house go here. And slowly, because a number of these different builders are, buying up a lot, buying two, buying three, you would slowly fill in this neighborhood. Well, Levitt went in there and like a manufacturer, right, he was rolling out these lots, one after another, one after another, one after another. And then he'd turn the corner and come back. And shortly after those slabs were built, the framers came and they set these walls. And then a whole different crew came in and set the rafters. And a whole different crew came and sheathed the house. And a whole different crew brought plumbing trees back into the thing. And they dropped them right into the plumbing thing. They had radiated heated floors. I mean, he was doing some crazy things. And so he approached this development, and when he was going hot, he was building 10,000 houses a year. These Levittown developments that developed very fast, 17, 18, 19,000 houses that sold out very quickly. There was weekends that he sold 1,000 houses in a weekend. Astounding, right? The top 50 guy on the home building list today doesn't do 1,000 houses in a year. That's how many he's doing in a weekend. So it was astounding what he was doing. And he developed the neighborhoods, and he would have pitches like, your son's never going to have to cross a busy street to get to school. You're going to have a neighborhood. He was big into Little League. He had Little League ballparks all over his neighborhoods. He was creating communities. He was creating the suburbs. So if you ever wonder about urban flight, when that happened, it happens in the 50s and 60s as production builders really hit their stride and start building houses cheap and fast. Now, the beautiful thing is how he solved the housing crisis. Because if you're living, let's say you're living in Philadelphia in 1928, and you're in a high rise, you're in an apartment, and the Great Depression happens, and you survive through this time period. The next 15, 20 years, no improvements on your apartment. You might be sharing a bathroom down the hall with another family. You are living in a situation that hasn't been improved in a long time. You might be paying $50, $100 a month to live there. Levitt comes along and says, I'll get you a house for $50 a month. You'll have a yard. You'll have a place to park your car. You'll have fruit trees. He had to teach people how to mow the grass because they'd never mowed the grass before. Crazy ideas that we kind of take for granted living in these houses that he had to teach people how to do. And so here's the bad side. Levitt is basically, because he broke the house down into 26 parts, he basically also broke the craftsman down into 26 parts because he didn't want to pay the craftsman who could frame a house, sheathe the house, roof the house, trim the house, hang the doors. He wanted to pay an individual who only knew how to hang doors and an individual who only knew how to sheathe the house separately so that he could pay them lower wages. He had people that walk around with a blue bucket of paint and a red bucket of paint, right? I mean, he had it broken down. There was a statistic that he was finishing a house every like 30 minutes or something. It was just crazy how many houses he was building and his process and the way he was doing it. Now, the problem is that imagine him breaking the unions, breaking the carpenters guilds, breaking those groups that would have those skills, and he all of a sudden breaks it up so that craft, okay, and the skilled craftsman who's spent 20 years learning how to build all the different facets of a house, all of a sudden isn't worth anything because they can hire a guy to hang doors and they can hire a guy to go sheathe the house, and it's not just this one-stop person who can go do everything. That, in 1947, let's say, isn't a big deal. But you go to 47, 57, 67, okay, now a generation has passed, and by the 60s and 70s, okay, there's all of a sudden a bunch of carpenters who no longer know how to build, okay? They no longer know how to craft. And so your 70s, 80s, 90s, all of a sudden 2 generations have gone now where they've forgotten how to craft, and they've forgotten how to build. My whole video is the lost art of building. We've forgotten how to build. It happens during this time period. This is what's going on. Now, realize that 1980s, okay, is when the McMansion, okay, the word is coined, right? What's going on? Why is there something called a McMansion, okay? Why is there something called a cookie cutter house? There's never a cookie cutter house in the 20s. Why is there a cookie cutter house now in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? It's because we've changed the way we build. We've changed the way we think about building, and all of a sudden it's no longer about beauty. It's no longer about craft. It's about speed and production. It's about how fast you can build. And so this, let's just say this builder in 1950, 55, he starts realizing he can make a lot more money by building houses cheap and fast. And a lot of things is happening in this period. People want those houses, right? They want the big sprawling ranches and things like that. But there's a reason houses no longer have an architectural style, okay? You can watch my other videos to go into that. But it's because all the styles and details have been taken out of them in order to make them impressive, okay? And so the McMansion, what is a McMansion? It's basically a Levittown house with granite countertops, with a built up crown molding, maybe a fancy door in the front. And so all of a sudden, we've lost our way about how we think about building. All of these words that are kind of derogatory words have shown up in our vocabulary because of this period of time. Because we ran out of housings, we come out of the war, and we start building cheap and fast, and we forget how to build. You have let's just take the Staub House or some of those historic houses or Thistle Hill, right? Those houses are crafted, okay? It's raw materials in a large part, crafted by craftsmen who know how to put things together, who know how to design things, know how to carve, right? Who know how to shape things, who know how to take a windowsill and pitch it so that water moves off it. You think of the carved room at the Staub House. That room could never or very rarely show up in a house today. It would be a very expensive house to have hand-carved moldings in it today. Now, the Staub House, when it was built, was a very nice house, but it wasn't uncommon. It wasn't like, well, no one knows how to carve. Today, except for Vossel, no one knows how to carve, right? Back then, it was a craft and it was a skill that people had, that people knew how to do. We introduced all of these composite materials and stuff to overcome this craftsmanship, to overcome this lack of ability to install, and we are dumbing down the process. So we have the builder, right, who put it together. We have the manufacturer, the supplying materials, and we have the architect, the designer. And sadly, the designer abandoned traditional design and traditional details in the late 40s into the early 50s. Now, there's a lot of theories why. There's a lot of reasons why people think that, but one of them is Hitler and Mussolini, right? They were staunch classicists. And if you look at the designs that Albert Speer was putting together for Berlin, or Mussolini restoring the Roman Forum and all the Roman antiquities and things like that, their fascist government became associated with classical design. And so Gropius comes over from Germany. He runs Harvard School of Design. Mies van der Rohe, who had taught at the Bauhaus, both had taught at the Bauhaus. And a bunch of these German immigrants run out of Germany because of Hitler and his fascist ideas, come to America, come to other parts of the country. And architects naturally look at Look, we just got into two world-defining wars, World War I and World War II. Why did we fight? What's going on? We got to change our focus. We got to change our attitude. And so they focused on a new design ideal. Instead of, the design ideal in 1926 was to look to the past, okay? You look at the École des Beaux-Arts, that school, that French school that defined so much of the architectural training that American architects went through, was a study of things in the past, was a study of looking back to the proportions and the ideals of the past in order to create beautiful things today. After 1946, the idea is no longer looking back, but looking forward, okay? And the idea is no longer that the precedent is what matters, it's originality is what matters. It's the great genius, the artist as a genius who comes along and can do these incredible things, right? That's the goal, okay? And so they turn their back on classical ideas, they turn their back on residential design. And so residential design no longer has design leaders, okay? Frank Lloyd Wright, in the early 1900s, most of his work is residential. You know, Frank Gehry, if you think of architects today, very little of their work is residential. Most of it is commercial. Most of it is architect type projects that heap praise on themselves as opposed to creating beautiful environments and beautiful things. So this 20-year period of time, 1926 to 46, it changed the way we think about building, it changed the way we think about the materials that we put in our house, and it changed architecture and design. So it's not so much that this period of time is what defines everything later, right? But if you wonder why our houses are ugly today, it's because the builders are in charge of building, the architect's no longer involved, and the builder's just building something to make money. Right? It's become a profit game, and it's no longer about craftsmanship and beauty. It's about money. Realize that if 1926 they built 1 million houses a year, if that's the goal, they did that without production builders. They did that without people building 80,000 houses a year. Okay, and so there is a way to do this again. There is a way, but everybody has to be on board. The architects have to be on board, the builders have to be on, the manufacturers, in order to build beautiful again. And that's really the goal. I talk a lot in my videos, if you watch them, about the lost art of building, about the death of craftsmanship. And I really do believe those things happened. When it happened, or when it started maybe, is this time period. It's the trickle-down effect of this 20-year period of time that changes building and changes our environment, that we really need to go back to. Now, I've found in my business and in my work, people gravitate towards and love beautiful things. And we all do. We love beauty. There is an expectation right now in the home building industry with the homeowner that most houses today are disposable, that they are not built to last 100 years. And so the way we change that, the way we bring about change, is we demand more. We demand beauty. We demand well-crafted things. And I guarantee you, if you're the homeowner watching this, and homeowners basically say, no, I'm not buying that. That's no good. I'm not going to accept those snout-nosed houses. I'm not going to accept non-design. I'm not going to accept these ugly details or products that are going to fall apart. It will change the industry. Some positive things that are going on, and I look to Seaside, Florida, and Alice Beach, which I'm going for Thanksgiving, and I can't wait. And if you go on my Instagram, you can see a bunch of pretty pictures of these houses. It was created around an ideal. It starts with Seaside, the New Urbanists, and Andreas Duwane, DPZ, and a bunch of these different architects that basically look to the past. That's one of the keys of how neighborhoods used to be designed, that you could walk to school, that you could walk to the local store, that they've built those kind of communities. And that whole stretch of 30A with Rosemary Beach, Alice Beach, Seaside, the quality of building is just skyrocketed there. The price has too, okay? But that's not a negative. That means that people value good design. That means they value craftsmanship. That means they value beauty. And so if you are, a builder looking to, well, how do I get a name for myself? Start building and crafting beautiful things. If you're a homeowner that says, how do I get a good house today? Find builders, find architects who care. There are really positive, good things happening out there, guys. I think the low point has been met, but classical design, I talk about the ICAA, Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. It's a place that you can start. Traveling, going to Europe and being inspired by beautiful things. New Urbanists and going and traveling to the Seaside. Go to Colonial Williamsburg. Just take your family there. It is a joy to walk down those streets. It's a joy to look at those houses, because they're simple, but they're beautifully crafted, beautifully made, built to last hundreds of years, and that really should be the goal. We establish that, we build that kind of expectation for building for our homes, and our communities become better. Our character becomes better. Architects used to write that if you want honest citizens, build honest houses. That is still true today. Winston Churchill said, first we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us, is true, okay? And what we build matters. That's a motto here at Hull. What we build defines us, okay? And so these are important things. And that 20 years, okay, and the effects of that 20 years really has changed the way housing has gone today. Let me know what you guys think. That's the theory, that's the story. I'm Brent Hull, thanks for watching.